Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the still incense-scented chambers of ancient Egypt. The torches flicker against sandstone walls. The air is heavy, humid, and thick with the faint scent of palm resin. You're not a tourist or even a priest. You're here for something quieter, slower, stranger. You're here to become a mummy, and not the horror movie kind, no bandage chasing, arms outstretched nonsense tonight. This is the real thing, sacred, meticulous, slightly squishy. The walls around you are etched with hieroglyphs, gods with ibis heads and jackal faces stare down at you like mildly disapproving parents. The chamber is lit dimly, but you can make out the outline of the stone slab at the center of the room. That slab is your final bed. You won't be alone. There are men here, specialists, silent, calm, methodical. They've done this many times before. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It keeps the embalming oils flowing. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is, where you are. I love knowing who's drifting off to ancient death rituals in the middle of Ohio at 3 a.m. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes flutter closed, and when they open again, it's as though centuries have passed. You're lying still. You can't move, but you're not afraid. The room is cool now, the walls whispering a breeze that isn't quite wind, but isn't nothing either. You've entered the realm of the embalmers, where flesh becomes memory, and memory gets carefully packed for eternity. The process begins not with knives, but with prayer. A priest in a leopard skin sash stands beside you, reciting words in the language of the gods, words designed not for you really, but for your Ka, your spirit double. According to ancient Egyptian belief, your Ka sticks around after death, moody and confused, needing guidance, snacks, and sometimes a bit of fanfare. This whole operation, mostly for them. You've already been declared officially dead. Your body has been washed with Nile water because even in death, a proper rinse matters, and gently anointed with palm wine. Not for flavor, for purification. Think of it like spiritual hand sanitizer, except all over your body. And then they wait. Because there's a certain ritual pacing to this. You're not a rush job. No one's stuffing you into a sarcophagus before your time. Mummification takes time. 70 days, give or take. The ancient Egyptians were in no hurry. When you're preparing someone for forever, what's a couple extra days? After the cleansing, you're moved to the table. Not cold steel, polished limestone, smooth. It cradles your body like a ceremonial cradle, if a cradle were specifically designed for internal organ extraction. The embalmers gather their tools, hooks, knives, spoons. Yes, spoons. Small linen cloths. Nothing looks particularly high-tech, but everything has a purpose. Every item is a whisper of procedure passed down through generations. They start by covering your face, not because they're squeamish, because it's respectful. Eyes closed, mouth slack. You're no longer fully here, but you're not fully gone either. In between, in flux, and flux is sacred. One man steps forward, the nascent extractor, as he might be called in today's HR system, and lifts a thin, curved hook. Where does he put it? Right up your nostril. Yes, that part is real. There's no gentle way to phrase it. The tool is inserted, twirled, and used to scramble the brain into something resembling pudding. Then it's coaxed out bit by bit through your nose. Not exactly a spa treatment, but hey, your soul's already elsewhere, so you're not feeling it. Historians still argue whether they always got the brain out this way. Some evidence suggests it was discarded immediately. Others believe it was sometimes left in and allowed to rot. Yummy. But in most cases, the brain not considered useful for the afterlife. Too soft. Too strange. The Egyptians thought thinking happened in the heart. You know, the thumpy one. Which brings us to the heart. Ah, the debate. Should it stay or should it go? Many embalmers believe the heart was the seat of intelligence, emotion, memory, and morality. Basically the full resume. So, ideally, you'd want to keep that tucked safely in your chest. After all, when you reach the Hall of Two Truths, in the afterlife, your heart would be weighed against a feather, the feather of Mahat, goddess of truth and justice. Too heavy in your crocodile food, too light, same result. But here's the twist. Archaeological evidence shows that a surprising number of mummies were buried without their hearts. Which begs the question, did the embalmers forget? Was there a regional trend? Did some priests just get lazy? Historians still argue whether it was accidental symbolic or some now lost belief. But one thing's clear, heart or no heart, you were getting your organs removed next. Stomach, intestines, liver, lungs, each carefully lifted, gently rinsed, and placed in their own sacred jars. Canopic jars named for a mythic sailor whose jars once protected his remains. Each jar had a lid shaped like a protective deity. The human-headed Imsati watched over your liver. The jackal-headed Duamutef kept your stomach safe. Hapi, the baboon, took your lungs, and Kebe-Senuef, the falcon-headed one, guarded your intestines, which makes you wonder, why didn't the brain get a jar? Poor brain, forever the overlooked squishy bit. Anyway, now that you're, shall we say, emptier, it's time for drying, not the kind of casual air dry you give your laundry. No. This is 40 days in Natron. Natron is a magical Egyptian mixture of salt baking soda and a dash of divine intention. It dries your body out so thoroughly that even your toes forget what moisture feels like. Your skin tightens. Your eyes sink. Your cheeks collapse inward. But you're clean, preserved, becoming less meat and more symbol. Some embalmers stuff your body with linen and sawdust to keep you shapely. Others pack in resin-soaked leaves or even onions. That's right, onions. Archaeologists once unwrapped a mummy to find a full onion tucked inside the skull. Whether it was symbolic or someone's lunch is still unknown. And while you sit in your salt spa, silent, unmoving, timeless, the priests chant, not just over you, but for you. They read from the Book of the Dead, or at least from scrolls inspired by it, prayers to Anubis, invocations to Isis, protective spells to keep your soul from wandering too far while your flesh transforms. Even now, you're somewhere in between, still slightly human, almost eternal, a work in progress. And you don't even know you're just lying there, drying like a sacred fig, preparing to become not just a preserved body, but an icon, a vessel, a symbol of devotion power, and the baffling commitment of ancient Egypt to making sure no one enters the afterlife underdressed. You'll be ready soon. Not yet, but soon. The embalmers are patient, and the gods even more so. You're finally dry. Not just towel off from the pool dry, but bone-dry, brittle, papery, perfectly preserved. Your skin now crackles slightly when touched like dried leaves in autumn. Your limbs are stiff, but that's fine. You won't be using them much. The priests know this isn't the end of you, just the start of your next outfit. Because now comes the dressing. But first a rub down. Before you get wrapped in layers of linen, your newly desert-fried body needs moisturizing, yes, moisturizing. The embalmers weren't about to let you step into the afterlife looking like an abandoned scroll. You're gently massaged with sacred oils, cedar, myrrh, palm, and the sort of fragrances that would make modern perfumers weep with envy. Your skin gleams faintly under torchlight. Even now you smell divine, literally. The Egyptians believed scent helped bridge the mortal and divine realms. So, if you were soaked in something spicy, earthy, and blessed, the gods would notice. Imagine walking into eternity, smelling like a royal temple incense burner. Not bad, really. Next, they anoint you with resin, sticky, dark, viscous. It coats your body in a thin lacquer that seals in your essence and keeps moisture and nosy insects out. The resin smells strong and strange, like a mix between burning wood and old promises. It also helps glue your wrappings in place later. Double bonus. Historians still debate what exact combinations of resins and oils were used. Some say pine tar. Others suggest imported myrrh and frankincense from across the sea. There's even evidence of bitumen. Yes, the stuff used in road paving being slathered onto elite corpses in later periods. Whatever the recipe, the effect is unmistakable. You go from corpse to artifact. And now, the linen arrives. Clean white, finely woven cut into long strips. There's a reverence to the way it's handled, like wrapping a sacred relic, not a person, which, in fairness, is kind of both. The first layer goes around your fingers and toes, one by one. Each digit, each joint, meticulously wrapped with precision and care. Like a present, but instead of gift paper and a bow, it's layers of thread-counted cotton and a few muttered prayers. Then your arms, your legs, your chest. Each wrap is smoothed down, then brushed with resin to help it hold. Then comes another layer, and another, and another. You're being transformed slowly into a sculpture. The embalmers tuck tiny charms between layers, amulets shaped like beetles, eyes, anks, and feathers. These aren't decorative. They're functional. That scarab over your heart, it's there to whisper to the gods that your soul deserves a second chance. The eye of Horus over your neck, meant to protect your voice, even if your mouth stays closed forever. Every amulet has a job to do. You are being spiritually armored, layered up in divine magic like a sleep-deprived wizard packing for eternity. And, yes, there are a lot of layers. Some mummies were wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen. Imagine being lovingly burritoed over the course of hours, days even. Some embalmers took short breaks. Others kept going chanting as they went. Every fold had to lie just right. At this point, you're no longer visibly human. You're a shape, a sacred silhouette. The body beneath is sealed off, protected, inaccessible. You're beginning to resemble the mummies you've seen in museums. Tightly cocooned arms, crossed face, hidden. But your face, well, it's about to get an upgrade, because the final step is the mask. If you're someone of means, maybe a noble, a priest, or just someone who saved aggressively for their death, your mask will be made of gold leaf over carved wood. The face is idealized, youthful, serene, often with kohl-rimmed eyes and a faint, knowing smile. It's not meant to be your actual face. It's the face your soul will wear in the afterlife. No gold, no problem. Wooden masks were common, beautifully painted and decorated. Even if your budget didn't cover precious metals, the craftsmen still gave their best. After all, this was for eternity. And no one wants to show up to the divine judgment looking half done. As they lower the mask over your face, everything slows. The chants soften. The torchlight flickers. You are no longer just a body. You are a mummy. The transformation is complete. You have become what the ancient Egyptians called a sa, a perfected form, spiritually sound, physically preserved, ritually prepared to survive for millennia. You are memory in linen, history in resin. You are oddly beautiful. Now there are still some finishing touches. Small bits of cloth are tucked in for reinforcement. More prayers are whispered, sometimes directly into your ears. One priest might draw a line of coal across your mask's eyes to honor Hathor. Another might dot your linen with powdered minerals for added spiritual conductivity. And finally, you're ready for the tomb. But don't go getting ahead of yourself. We're not there yet. You still have more appointments on your mummification schedule, more strange details, more historical confusion, more moments where archaeologists shrug and say, "We're not entirely sure what this part was for." Case in point, some mummies were buried with fake eyes inserted into their wrappings. Not glass, not gems, sometimes just painted stones or carved bits of wood. Why historians still argue whether this was symbolic, practical, or just a way to keep the face looking awake. Either way, it's a little unsettling and a lot fascinating. Then there are the mummies with false beards, even women, even children, because in the afterlife a beard was a sign of divine authority. So the embalmers would tie on a little false chin beard made from woven thread or metal curling elegantly at the end like something out of a Baroque painting. Imagine entering the next world looking like a baby-faced pharaoh. Iconic. But not all mummies were quite so well treated. We'll get to that later. Right now, your process has gone well. Exceptionally well, even. You've been cleaned, emptied, dried, oiled, wrapped, adorned, masked, and mythologized. You're no longer a person. You're an object of reverence, a vessel of eternity, a body prepared not for rest, but for continuation. And as you lie still, surrounded by quiet whispers and drifting smoke, you realize something. This is only the beginning. So here you are, swaddled in linen, glistening faintly with resin, eyes forever fixed behind a painted mask. You no longer resemble yourself, or anyone at all, really. But that's the point. The mummification process has turned you into something otherworldly, something not quite human, not quite statue, not quite story. You're in between. But while you're lying perfectly still, history continues, swirling quietly around you like desert winds brushing against sandstone. Right now, the priests are busy preparing your most sacred accessories, your canopic jars. Remember those charming containers they tucked your organs into? The ones shaped like gods. Yep. Time to check on your liver's new Airbnb. Each of your internal organs was considered so spiritually important, it got a deity-level babysitter. And these weren't just artistic flourishes. These jars had personalities. The liver went to Imseti, human-headed and full of compassion. He'd gently guard your emotional essence. The lungs went to Hoppy, baboon-headed and cheerful, if a little manic. He probably liked drama. Your stomach ended up with Duamutef, who had the head of a jackal and the vigilance of a bodyguard, and your intestines. Those were claimed by Keba Senuef, falcon-headed and flighty, probably the cool one. Each jar was placed in a wooden chest or stone coffer, carefully labeled. You'd think this process would be standardized, like, okay, everyone lungs go here, intestines go there. But no. Historians still argue about the order, the names, even the spellings. Apparently, ancient embalmers weren't using IKEA instructions. Still, the jars weren't just vessels, they were protectors. Spells were spoken over them. Sometimes entire hymns were chanted. There's one particularly delightful inscription that translates to something like, "Do not let this stomach rot, O Duamutef, or I will be very displeased," which honestly feels relatable. But here's the strange part. Not everyone's organs were actually in those jars. Archaeologists have opened mummies only to find the jars were empty. Sometimes they were dummies, sealed, hollow symbolic placeholders. So, what happened to the organs? Were they buried separately? Were they destroyed? Were embalmers running low on inventory? Historians still argue. Of course they do. Meanwhile, you lie there, still serene. The linen has started to settle. The resin is cooling into a glossy finish. The scent in the chamber is thick now. Frankincense and myrrh, the olfactory equivalent of sacred silence. Everything smells vaguely spicy, vaguely smoky, vaguely eternal. You may have noticed a few extra things being placed around you. Trinkets, charms, amulets. These are your spiritual gadgets for the road ahead. Think of them like divine accessories. And trust me, you'll need them. Your embalmers are tucking them into your linen layers like tiny invisible pockets, one by your throat, another near your heart, one beneath your knees, each with a job. There's the Jed pillar, a symbol of stability, not metaphorical stability, literal. It's meant to keep your spine strong for eternity. Then there's the scarab beetle. This one usually sits over your heart. It whispers to the gods during your judgment. Some even have inscriptions like, "Do not speak ill of me, heart. Be cool." Because you see, in Egyptian mythology, your heart can betray you. It can tattle. It can throw you under the celestial chariot, which is why a backup scarab is wise. Then there's the Eye of Horus, offering protection against evil spirits and unflattering afterlife gossip, and the Ankh, symbolizing life, just in case the gods needed a reminder of your membership status. These little talismans are like a passport, an insurance policy, and a security system all in one. And here's a charming tidbit. Sometimes embalmers would slip little papyrus scrolls into the wrappings, containing prayers, spells, or instructions. One reads something along the lines of, "Guide this one gently. He means well," which is honestly sweet. The wrapping continues. At this point, you're like a rolled up parchment of faith. So many layers, so many secrets, and still more to come. Because now they start wrapping your face. Not just covering it, but sculpting it, building soft contours with linen pads so your features don't completely vanish. The embalmers wrap with surprising tenderness. Over the brow, under the chin, across the nose bridge. Each movement is slow, deliberate, as if drawing a map back to who you once were. They whisper your name as they do it, again and again, to keep your identity anchored. Ancient Egyptians believed that forgetting someone's name meant destroying their soul, erasing it. So the embalmers say your name out loud throughout the process, weaving it into linen, into resin, into air. It becomes part of the tomb's memory, a ghost sewn into the walls. They might write it too, on your wrappings, your coffin, your mask. Because to be remembered is to remain. And yes, you're still lying there, absolutely motionless, looking fabulous. But now something curious happens. A small animal is brought in. No, it's not your new pet. In the afterlife, it's probably a cat, or an ibis, or a baboon. You see, humans weren't the only ones who got mummified. In ancient Egypt, animals were often wrapped up just like people and buried with full honors. Cats, especially, were considered sacred. They were associated with the goddess Bastet, protector of the home and bringer of extremely judgmental purring. Some tombs contain hundreds of mummified animals, not as pets, but as offerings. Tiny messengers between the world of men and the realm of the gods. Think of them as divine carrier pigeons, but fluffier. And sometimes, just sometimes, wealthy families would mummify their favorite pets, complete with tiny sarcophagi, painted eyes, and little gold earrings. One dog mummy was found wearing a collar with the inscription, "The good boy who guards the house." Heart melting. So now, as you rest in your pristine cocoon of linen and magic, a small mummified cat is placed beside you. Just in case you need company, just in case eternity gets lonely. Outside, the sun is beginning to set. The final rays of light stretch through narrow slits in the tomb's outer chamber. Dust swirls gently in the air. The workers murmur softly. One leans against the wall, exhausted. Another adjusts the folds of your linen one last time. You are ready. But your journey isn't over, not even close. There's still the matter of your tomb, where you'll be placed, and what strange, lavish, or occasionally absurd treasures they'll pack in with you. But for now, you rest. Golden, sealed, surrounded by incense and myth, waiting, because that's what mummies do best. Your new form lies waiting pristine in its layered linen, tucked and oiled like a divine gift, wrapped by history's most patient hands. But now the sacred workshop quiets. The priests exchange a final series of nods. A gentle drumbeat sounds from a distance, low like a heartbeat, trying to remember itself. It's time. The moment has come for you to be moved, not just as a body, but as a symbol, a narrative, a bundled story that will be placed inside stone and shadow for all eternity. You're not being buried, you're being enshrined. And with that, your journey to the tomb begins. But where are you going exactly? That depends on who you were. If you were wealthy, truly wealthy, you're getting a rock-cut tomb deep in a desert cliffside, or nestled into the Valley of the Kings. The kind of place that whispers eternity and echoes secrets. But maybe you weren't royalty. Maybe you were a respected scribe, or a priest, or a merchant with an eye for embalming packages. That means You're headed to a smaller chamber, maybe even a shared one, still elaborately carved, still lit by oil lamps and lined with jars, but maybe not quite as many golden couches or ivory combs. Even so, your tomb will be your home forever. And so the procession forms. You're carried slowly, reverently. The priests sing hymns to Osiris, the lord of the underworld. Women wail dramatically at the edges of the crowd. Not always family, mind you. Professional mourners were totally a thing. You're not famous until strangers are sobbing over your legacy. The desert sun beats down. Incense smokes gently from clay pots. The air smells like myrrh, sand, and salt. Eventually, the tomb is reached. It stands open dark and waiting. It's cooler inside, even before you step in. The walls are covered in stories, carvings, and paintings that show your greatest hits. You harvesting grain, you making an offering, you fishing with absurdly large fish. Some of these might be artistic exaggerations. You were not, in fact, 9 feet tall, but eternity favors a little PR polish. The tomb isn't just a final resting place. It's a stage for your soul's greatest performance. The inner chamber contains your sarcophagus. Sometimes it's made of wood, sometimes alabaster, occasionally gold. But let's be realistic. Yours is painted wood, maybe inlaid with a bit of lapis or turquoise, if you really planned ahead. Inside the coffin is decorated with more spells, protective ones, chants to guide you safely through the Duat, the Egyptian afterlife, a landscape of rivers, gates, and weirdly judgmental animal-headed guardians. Think of it as a mystical obstacle course with a lot of sand and occasional crocodiles. Here's where things get slightly unsettling, because before you're sealed away, there's one more ritual to perform: the opening of the mouth. No, really. The priests gather at your head. One of them steps forward, holding a ceremonial blade or adze. He makes precise gestures near your lips, your eyes, your ears, mimicking the actions of opening them. The idea is to restore your senses in the afterlife, so you can speak, hear, see, breathe. Kind of important if you're planning to navigate eternity without tripping over celestial furniture. Sometimes they even press a little tool into your actual mouth, just in case. It's like turning on a sacred switch. And the belief was strong if done properly. This ritual literally reactivated your soul's ability to function. Without it, you might drift endlessly, or worse, arrive mute at your final judgment. And that's not how you want to show up to court. So your mouth is opened. Your name is spoken one last time. Your coffin is gently lowered into the sarcophagus. Then the lid is placed on top. A dull thud echoes through the chamber. The torches are dimmed. Outside, the desert wind sighs. Now the offerings begin to arrive. Because if you think you're heading into the afterlife without provisions, think again. The ancient Egyptians were not minimalists when it came to eternity. Your tomb is stocked like a long-term Airbnb, jars of honey, baskets of dates, dried fish, loaves of bread shaped like birds. And let's not forget the tiny clay figurines known as Shabti, miniature workers, who will magically rise to serve you in the next world. Lazy in life. Not a problem. Your clay interns have got it covered. You might also be buried with your favorite furniture, a mirror, a bed frame, maybe your pet's mummified remains. Yes, Fluffy gets to join you. And for the particularly well-connected, a boat, not a model boat. A full-sized boat just in case the river of the dead needs paddling. But not everyone got the luxury package. There were also economy-class burials. If you were less wealthy, your tomb might be a sand pit. Your mummy, wrapped in reused linens, or even old fishing nets. And your offerings, maybe a single jar of beer and a loaf of barley bread, still meaningful, still respectful, but less showy. Even so, the process mattered. The belief was that anyone regardless of wealth could reach the field of reeds, the Egyptian version of paradise, if their heart was light and their rituals complete. And that's kind of beautiful. But back to you. Your tomb is nearly full now. The last offerings are being arranged. A priest is checking your mask for dust. Another is adjusting the lid of one canopic jar, as if the liver god seemed a bit crooked. Then the workers begin sealing the entrance, stone by stone, until the light is gone, until all that remains is quiet. You are enshrined, locked in, not as a secret, but as a prayer. Generations will pass, kingdoms will fall, sand will shift, and still you'll remain. A time capsule wrapped in linen and myth, waiting for your name to be spoken once more. Because in ancient Egypt to die wasn't the end. It was simply the most dramatic wardrobe change of your life. So now you lie in the tomb, wrapped, anointed, and surrounded by the lovingly packed essentials of the afterlife, clay shabtis, perfumed oils, and perhaps even a spare wig or two. You'd think your story might slow down here, now that you're sealed in behind 100 stones and a couple dozen lines of hieroglyphs. But no, because you still haven't answered the biggest question of all. What happened to your heart? And it's a real cliffhanger. See, in theory, your heart should still be right there in your chest cavity, waiting for its moment of cosmic judgment, gently lounging behind layers of resin and linen, humming quietly to itself. The Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of the soul, the center of memory, morality, emotion. Basically, your eternal resume. But here's the twist. Some mummies don't have a heart. It's gone. Removed. Poof. Missing, like your keys, when you're already late. And now historians argue endlessly about whether the heart was supposed to stay in or be taken out. Some scholars insist it was removed and mummified separately. Others say it had to stay inside the body to be weighed against the feather of Ma'at in the afterlife. There are even tombs with fake hearts carved from stone or wax slipped in at the last minute like, yeah, this totally counts. Let's be honest. The afterlife is a high-stakes game show, and you need to show up with the right documents. Which brings us to the next episode in your slow transformation drying out. Because if you thought removing your insides was intense, just wait until you spend 40 full days marinating in Natron. Yes, Natron, the desert's original dissecant. It's a naturally occurring blend of salt baking soda and what can only be described as ancient magic mixed with sandpaper. The embalmers pack it around you, inside you, under you, over you, until you're basically a mummy-shaped container of powdered detergent. And then they wait. 40 days in a dry shaded room with air thick with salt and silence. By the end, your body is, well, let's call it crunchy. Your skin is tight and browned like overcooked turkey. Your features are shrunken lips, pulled back, eyes sunken. Honestly, you look like someone pressed the dehydrate button on a very cursed air fryer. But weirdly, the embalmers are pleased, because to them, this is not gross. This is divine preparation. They unwrap the natron and examine you. If your body is intact, you've passed. If it smells decent, even better. One ancient embalming manual apparently instructed, do not allow the odor of putrefaction to offend the gods. Sound advice for life and afterlife. Now comes one of the strangest and most sacred moments in your whole post-life career. You get a makeover. Yes, really. Because once you've dried into a perfectly desiccated raisin of yourself, the embalmers apply a kind of restorative oil bath. They rub scented resins and oils into your skin, cedar, juniper, cinnamon, even lotus oil, if your estate splurged a little. It's not about moisturizing. It's about consecration. The scent isn't just for aroma. It wards off evil spirits and prepares your soul for the next stage of its journey. You're being transformed from a lifeless body into a holy object, and the resins themselves help preserve the body, further acting like a sealant. They harden over time, forming a protective shell that makes your linen wrappings stick beautifully and also smell like the inside of a fancy antique shop. Meanwhile, your face is getting attention too. The embalmers may pad certain areas, cheeks, nose, lips, to restore some of your living appearance. It's like a spiritual spa day. Maybe they stuff your cheeks with linen or glue artificial eyes over your sockets. There's even some evidence that they painted on cosmetics. A little kohl, a touch of red ochre. Because, darling, you must look your best for judgment. And while this is happening, your embalmers are whispering prayers, quiet, rhythmic incantations to Anubis and Osiris, to Hathor and Thoth. They ask for mercy. They ask for safe passage. They ask that you be recognized by the gods. You might be lying silently, but your name is echoing through the room. In fact, in some tombs, archaeologists have found entire spells written out in long looping hieratic script, all to be read aloud during this phase. Think of it like a post-mortem podcast, narrated for the benefit of your spirit. You are cleansed. You are whole. You are returning. There's even one spell that ends with the phrase, "May your nose not rot," a surprisingly tender sentiment. Then comes a strange, delicate moment. The embalmers begin to reshape your limbs gently, bending your arms across your chest or along your sides depending on your social status and the trends of your time. Yes, even in the afterlife, fashion matters. Old Kingdom mummies usually had arms straight down. Middle Kingdom mummies crossed them modestly. By the New Kingdom, royalty folded their arms over their chest like, "Yes, I am extremely regal. Thanks for noticing." Of course, not all bodies were cooperative. Occasionally, a limb snapped or fell off. You are, after all, quite dry. In such cases, embalmers might insert wooden sticks or tightly packed linen to prop you back into shape. One poor nobleman was found with a wooden spoon where his neck should have been. Improvisation is the mother of mummification. You're now nearly ready for wrapping, but not before one last anointing. The embalmers pour a final mixture, often made of melted resin oil and crushed incense, across your entire body. It's sticky, it's strong smelling, and it hardens into a dark, glistening shell. Some call it the black coating of the dead, a kind of spiritual lacquer. It's not pretty, but it is sacred. Because in Egyptian belief, black symbolized rebirth, the color of fertile Nile soil, the promise of return. So now your crunchy, scented, sealed body is not a corpse. It's a symbol, a promise, a portable soul, wrapped in oil, blessed with words, and ready for its final layer, the linen cocoon. And oh, we'll get to that next. Spoiler, it's going to take a while. You lie there, polished, like a ceremonial relic, your body hardened and fragrant from layers of oil resin and reverent prayer. The room hums with that still charged silence, the kind that settles in sacred spaces just before something ancient begins. Now comes the part you've probably imagined since you first learned what a mummy was, the wrapping. But forget Halloween gauze. Forget toilet paper costume levels of effort. This isn't some rushed job with a spool of cloth and a few quick loops. No, this is art, ritual, and devotion bound together in linen and belief. You are about to be lovingly turned into a bundle of spiritual engineering, and it's going to take weeks. First, the embalmers prepare the linen strips. These aren't just any cloth scraps. They're made of fine flax cut precisely into long, narrow bands. Some are bleached, others are soaked in resin oils or even spices. Some are plain, others are written on, inscribed with sacred verses to guide and protect you. Imagine a blanket made from spells, and you're halfway there. Now they begin. They start with your fingers and toes. Yes, each one gets its own little wrapping. Even your thumbs get their moment of glory. There's a strange tenderness in it, as if they're acknowledging every part of you mattered, that your body was sacred, even your pinky toes, then the hands, the feet, the legs, the arms. Everything is wrapped separately, and then again, together. Like the world's slowest, most spiritual game of Tetris. And with each layer, a prayer is spoken. Sometimes amulets are slipped in, small ones shaped like beetles, eyes, feathers, ankhs, or miniature gods. These aren't just jewelry. They are insurance policies for the soul. Each one carries a specific function. Protection from snakes, invisibility from demons, even strength to climb stairs in the afterlife. And yes, stairs existed in the afterlife. The Egyptians left nothing to chance. But now the most important part, the heart. And here things get interesting, because remember how we weren't sure whether your heart stayed in your body? Well, if it's gone, or if the embalmers decided your original heart wasn't quite up to snuff, they might insert a heart scarab. This was a large, usually green stone amulet carved in the shape of a beetle, inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead. The spell's purpose to convince your own heart not to rat you out during judgment. No, really. It literally begs your heart not to stand against you when you're weighed before the gods, which is a very ancient way of saying, please don't remind the universe of that one time I stole beer from Uncle Jehuti. The scarab lies flat on your chest, close to where the heart used to be. It rests there as the final protective charm, guarding your identity, your morality, and let's be honest, your eternal reputation. Then comes the head wrapping. This is done with delicate precision. Layers are built up to form the shape of your face, which will eventually be covered by a mask. The embalmers sometimes leave space for artificial eyes or paint features onto the outer wrappings to resemble your living face. It's a kind of portraiture, a promise to the gods. This was me. Please remember me kindly. And speaking of masks, if your family could afford it, you might get a cartonnage mask, a sculpted face made from linen and plaster painted gold or ochre with almond eyes outlined in kohl and lips that seem always slightly serene. If you were royalty or priestly, your mask might even be covered in real gold leaf. But if you weren't, don't worry, you'd still get something. Maybe painted wood or molded clay, still designed to show your best self. After all, this isn't a disguise. This is your passport photo for the afterlife, and you don't want to blink. Now the layers continue. Over the torso, the chest, the shoulders, the legs again. Horizontal strips, vertical strips, crisscrossed bands. With each round, more prayers, more incense, more resin, brushed on like a sacred varnish to hold everything in place. The embalmers step back now and then, checking symmetry. They adjust a strap here, add a token there. At one point, someone might recite the spell for not having your head fall off. Yes, that was a real concern. It's around this time that the embalmers begin to feel it the moment the body becomes something other, something between life and death, something sealed off from time and yet bound to it. There's even an old story about a young apprentice who started crying during a wrapping, overcome not by grief, but by awe. He saw in the folds of linen not a corpse, but a soul being prepared for a journey more vast than the Nile. Now, finally, the last strip is wrapped. The embalmers tie it off, whispering the final incantation. Then they press their palms to your chest. One last goodbye. You are at last a mummy. But the job isn't finished just yet, because a mummy can't simply be left lying on a table. No, you must be placed into your sarcophagus. And depending on your status, that sarcophagus might be part of a nesting doll of coffins, each more elaborate than the last. You might be lowered first into a coffin of cedar. Then that coffin goes into another box of painted stone. Then maybe into a larger stone container with carvings of winged goddesses on each side. The more coffins, the better the protection. The wealthier you were, the more boxes you got. One princess was buried inside 4 nested coffins, like a very fancy corpse lasagna. Once you're encased, the lid is sealed. Resin is poured around the edges. The names of gods are carved into the lid. And outside, the priests gather one last time. They chant. They pour libations. They light incense. Then silence. Your burial has reached its end. But in the Egyptian worldview, this isn't the end. It's the beginning of your journey, because from here, your soul splits into parts, the Ba, which can fly, and the Ka, which needs food and drink. They'll visit your tomb. They'll read the inscriptions on the walls, whispering your name. And if you're lucky, if your heart remains light and your name is remembered, you'll awaken not in this stone chamber, but in the field of reeds, a land of perfect fields, gentle breezes, and eternal springtime. But that journey still lies ahead. For now you sleep, perfectly preserved, wrapped in linen and myth, and ready to be remembered. So there you are, wrapped like the world's most sacred burrito, tucked safely in your nested coffins, the lid freshly sealed, and your Ba and Ka fluttering somewhere just beyond the edge of human perception. But while your soul is off preparing for eternity in the field of reeds, your body, oh, it's still got some work to do. Because now it's time to become one with your favorite ancient pantry item, Natron. Wait, didn't we already dry you out in Natron? Yes, but that was just the first time. That was the full body soak. Think of what comes next as a sort of preservation encore, just in case. Because the ancient Egyptians didn't trust time or tombs or rats' humidity, earthquakes, tomb robbers, or teenage archaeologists with brushes. They trusted Natron. And to understand why, you've got to know what Natron really is. It's not just salt. It's a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, sodium chloride, and sodium sulfate, a kind of desert-born baking soda, meets bleach, meets miracle preserver. The Egyptians found it in dry lake beds like Wadi Natron and realized pretty quickly that it could do more than just clean wounds and whiten linen. It could stop time. Well, sort of. When packed properly around a corpse, natron dries it out so thoroughly that bacteria and fungi simply can't party there. They need moisture to do their nasty work. Take that away, and your body skips rotting and goes straight to legendary. You've already been soaked in natron for 40 days, but now the embalmers rub more of it into your linen layers. They dust your feet. They sprinkle it around your sarcophagus like holy salt at a house blessing. And in some cases, they even fill your chest cavity with it after stuffing it with sawdust, resin-soaked linen, or onions. Yes, onions. Historians still argue whether onions were symbolic offerings or just the most convenient desiccant you could also eat if things got desperate. There's one mummy who had their eye sockets filled with onion rings, and not the kind you dip in ketchup. That said, this final natron ritual isn't always applied equally. Pharaohs and nobility get the full treatment, complete with fragrance upgrades. Meanwhile, lower-class mummification might involve a simpler process, dumping the body in a pit filled with sand and letting nature do its thing. Not quite glamorous, but honestly very efficient. Either way, the goal is the same. Make sure your body doesn't decay ever. And yes, they took it very seriously. One of the most fascinating things archaeologists have found in tombs are lists. Like literal checklists written by embalmers, heart removed, linen soaked in resin, natron applied evenly, head still attached. Imagine someone holding a clipboard in 1200 BCE muttering, "We forgot the left big toe again." Speaking of mistakes, there were plenty. Not every embalmer was a master. Some accidentally cooked the body by using too much resin too soon, turning skin into something resembling ancient barbecue. Others forgot organs inside. And yes, a few just gave up halfway and tossed the body into a basic wrap and pray setup. One mummy was found with a pack of playing pieces stuffed into their chest instead of internal organs. Were they symbolic storage? Did someone just run out of time before lunch? We'll never know. Historians still argue about how standardized the process really was. Some say there were strict protocols. Others believe there was a lot of freelancing improvisation and panicked linen stuffing. But what matters is that at the core of all this was belief. A belief that what happened to your body after death wasn't just medical, it was cosmic. The condition of your remains reflected the condition of your soul. So now, as your dry, dusted form rests within the final coffin, coated in resins, powders, oils, and love, your tomb is closed. But it doesn't stay silent for long, because there's still ritual to be done. Cue the arrival of the opening of the mouth ceremony. This was one of the final, most sacred acts in the mummification ritual. Performed outside the tomb entrance or sometimes within the burial chamber itself, it was basically a divine reboot. The ancient Egyptians believed that death closed off the senses and this ceremony reopened them. You couldn't speak, or eat, or breathe, or see, or hear, but with a few careful gestures and a whole lot of chanting, a priest could fix that. Using a special tool, often shaped like an adze, or a curved blade, the priest would touch your mouth, eyes, ears, and nose, symbolically restoring your senses. He might even touch your hands and feet, depending on how complete they wanted your spiritual comeback to be. Sometimes this was performed on your actual body. Other times it was done on a statue made in your likeness, which would then stand watch in your tomb. Either way, the message was clear. You are whole again. You are awake. You are ready. There's an incredibly poetic line from one funerary text that reads, "I open your mouth so you may speak truth in the hall of judgment," which is both beautiful and slightly terrifying, because you know judgment is next. But before we get to that metaphysical court date, we need to finish things up in the physical world. After the opening of the mouth, your tomb would be sealed. Maybe not forever, because, let's be honest, tomb robbers had other plans, but sealed with care and reverence. The outside might have inscriptions, prayers, a statue of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, maybe a curse or two. "May your arms fall off if you touch this door," was a popular vibe. Inside your coffin rests on a raised platform. Offerings are stacked nearby jars of beer loaves of bread onions, dried meats, perfumes, and maybe a board game for those long eternal nights. If you were wealthy, you might also have Shabti dolls, tiny figurines that would magically do your chores in the afterlife. Some tombs have hundreds. One guy had over 400. You could basically be unemployed for eternity. As the final rituals wind down, the priests begin the last chants. Torches flicker. The air is heavy with incense. Your name is spoken aloud 3 times, loud enough to echo into the void, because as long as your name is remembered, you live. It's quiet now. The tomb is sealed, and your journey through death, through drying, stuffing, wrapping, sculpting, praying, and a little seasoning, is finally complete. You are a mummy. You are eternal. You've been sealed in the tomb, immortal in theory, motionless in reality, and deeply wrapped in approximately 3 football fields worth of linen. You'd think the embalming team would call it a day and go grab a beer or maybe wrestle a crocodile for fun. But no, the job isn't quite done. Because while your body is now a dried, sacred bundle of rituals and salty chemistry, there's one more finishing touch that every respectable mummy needs: a glorious scent. That's right. It's time to make you smell divine. Not metaphorically, divine literally, like a god. Or at least like someone who's about to meet one. Because by now, after 40 days of soaking in Natron internal organ removal, head-to-toe wrapping, and some light spiritual engineering, you don't smell great. Even with all the resins and spices used during the earlier stages, embalming is not a glamorous process, scent-wise. So now the embalmers bring out their most luxurious supplies: incense, myrrh, frankincense, and a medley of resinous tree saps that are probably better suited for high-end perfume than for dead bodies. You don't just get a whiff of these things, they're packed into every fold, every crevice, every crook and corner of your wrappings. They're rubbed on, poured in, fanned around you with feathers. You are, in effect, being marinated in holiness. Historians still argue whether some of these aromas were meant to disguise the smell of death or simply to honor the gods. Most likely it was both. After all, if you're planning to show up in the afterlife for your big final judgment, you'd probably want to smell like a sacred garden, not like beef jerky left on a windowsill. One fringe theory even suggests that the specific mix of herbs and oils used on your body would identify your social class or region like a scented passport for the afterlife. Smell like saffron. Maybe you're royal. Smell like cedar upper class. Smell like onions and desperation. Budget burial. The jury's still out, but it's a compelling thought. And it's not just your body being blessed by fragrance. The tomb itself gets a makeover too. Incense is burned constantly in the days leading up to sealing. The scent fills the room, clings to stone, seeps into linen. It's a final sensory act, transforming a dark, potentially terrifying space into something ritually soothing, almost cozy. One tomb was found with a cache of perfumed cones, little wax pyramids designed to melt slowly, releasing scent over time. Picture a Yankee candle, but make it pharaoh. So now, as the scent of cardamom and cinnamon wafts through the air, the embalmers get to work on their last blessing, the final coat of resin. This is the ancient world's version of a protective shellac. It's dark, sticky, and glossy, made from tree sap mixed with oils. It's brushed over the outer wrappings to harden the linen and keep out moisture bugs, and let's be honest, time itself. Once dry, it forms a kind of lacquer that gives your bandages a permanent museum-ready sheen. And yes, this is why many ancient mummies appear dark brown or even black, not because of skin, but because of resin baked onto their wrappings for thousands of years. Some mummies were found so thoroughly coated in resin that modern scientists had to use CT scans to see through the layers. One 19th century archaeologist described such a mummy as sealed in a coffin of its own body. Poetic, if a little sticky. Now all the finishing touches are in place. But before you're fully committed to eternity, there's one last round of additions: the face and the feet. See, you can't go to the afterlife without looking your best. And that means accessories, starting with the gold toe caps. Yes, gold on your toes. If your family was wealthy enough, each toe and each finger would get a tiny gold sheath slid over like a high-end press-on nail. It wasn't just for style. Gold was considered the flesh of the gods. And placing it on your digits meant your body was transitioning from mortal to divine. Next, the facial enhancements. In many burials, your eyes would be painted onto the wrappings large, black-lined, eternally alert. Sometimes real stones were inserted to create a glassy, open-eyed stare. If they had the resources, artists would paint your features in lifelike detail, down to the shape of your lips or the curve of your brow. And finally, there's the funeral mask, crafted from cartonnage, a mix of linen and plaster wood or precious metals. It fits over your head, becoming the permanent representation of your eternal face, the one that will meet Osiris, the one that visitors will whisper to when they leave offerings. You're now visually complete. You look regal, serene, a bit stiff maybe, but certainly majestic. And most importantly, you smell amazing. As a final offering, someone might place a garland of flowers around your neck, lotus blossoms, papyrus reeds, maybe even desert herbs. These dry out almost instantly in the tomb's arid air, but for a brief moment, they remind everyone present that you were once alive and that your journey is only just beginning. The embalmers gather their tools. They whisper prayers. A priest sprinkles a final handful of natron, then waves a censer of incense in figure eights through the thickening air. It's quiet, a slow breath of history. And somewhere beyond the veil of this world, your soul watches, not with fear, but with the calm confidence of someone who has been prepared, preserved, perfumed, and painted into something more than human. You're no longer just a person. You're a symbol. You're a bridge between two worlds. You're a mummy. And soon, you'll be a story. Now that you're a fully wrapped, scented, and sanctified mummy, glistening with resin, infused with spices, and topped with a face made for the gods, you'd think the ritual was finally over. But no. You still need one last olfactory flourish, because apparently the embalming team isn't content until you're both completely dead and completely fabulous. Tonight we talk about the final chapter in your scent journey ritual fumigation and the bizarre power of sacred smoke. The tomb is dim flickering with the warm light of oil lamps. You, lying perfectly still on your wooden coffin bed, resemble a giant incense stick yourself. But now the room is being filled deliberately, heavily, with smoke. The priests have brought out censer pots, and in them they burn a heady cocktail of ingredients: frankincense, myrrh, sandalwood, and in some cases, exotic resins imported from places like Punt, an ancient land that may or may not have been somewhere near Somalia. Historians still argue whether Punt was a real place or a poetic metaphor. But what matters is that its spices cost more than your entire afterlife wardrobe. The smoke curls around the room, over your shrouded body, across the feet of the chanting priests, and up toward the elaborately painted ceiling of your tomb. Some of it clings to your wrappings. Some settles in the corners. Some, they believe, reaches the gods themselves. In fact, incense was considered an offering in itself, a way to nourish divine beings through scent. Just like bread and beer fed the body, sweet smoke fed the soul, and yours was hungry. The purpose wasn't just to mask any lingering aroma of death, though let's be honest, that didn't hurt. It was also to purify. The scent banished evil spirits, cleared the space of chaos, and essentially fumigated you for entrance into the eternal bureaucracy of the afterlife. Picture it like the TSA security line for the dead shoes optional. Passport in your amulet pouch. Carry-on baggage. Limited to spiritual regrets. Have you been properly smoked? You better be. They don't want just anyone walking into the hall of judgment smelling like swamp. And speaking of judgment, the gods apparently had preferences. Texts from temple walls list the gods and their preferred incense combinations. Ra, the sun god, he likes frankincense. Osiris, go with myrrh. Anubis, maybe throw in a little cedar. It's like divine aromatherapy, and you're the candle. Meanwhile, your tomb is filling with more than just smoke. There are chants, two long drawn-out mantras in Old Egyptian. Some are spoken aloud. Others are sung their syllables designed to vibrate just the right bones in your now hollow rib cage. These chants are part of what's called the ritual of transformation, the final stage where your soul, remember, that floating ba we talked about, officially receives the signal that it's safe to move on, that the body has been treated properly, that the priests have done their job, that it's time. And this is where things get a little mystical, because at this moment, drenched in scent, bathed in sound, sealed in linen, you are believed to be not just a person, but a kind of living statue of a god. That's right. You, the person who once got sand in your dinner and tripped over goats, are now a temporary embodiment of the divine. Your body, lifeless as it may be, is seen as a symbolic temple. Every part of you has been cared for with the same reverence one might show to a sacred idol. Your arms are like columns, your head a shrine, your bandaged toes probably metaphorical papyrus scrolls. There's even a passage in the Book of the Dead that reads, "I am the sacred image of Osiris. My flesh is his flesh, my bones his bones." It's metaphorical, yes, but also very literal, because Osiris was the first mummy, the one the gods put back together. And now you're following in those mythological footsteps. Now let's take a moment to acknowledge the quieter, weirder parts of this ritual. Some mummies have been found with bits of gold leaf pressed directly into the wrappings, not shaped, not decorative, just flakes stuck there. Maybe symbolic, maybe accidental. Maybe the ancient equivalent of just throw some glitter on it. We're running out of time. Other mummies have herbs stuffed inside their mouths. Not for eating, obviously. Possibly as a perfume sachet. Possibly to ward off spirits. Or maybe someone just really hated bad breath in the afterlife. There are also signs that some embalmers faked more expensive treatments. One mummy had painted on toe caps instead of gold. Another had a mask made of recycled boat parts. Creative, definitely. Respectful, maybe less so. Historians still debate whether these shortcuts were common or rare, but they paint a fascinating picture of the ancient mortuary business somewhere between sacred rite and small-town workshop. And yet, despite all the improvisation, shortcuts, and peculiar additions, the overall message was always the same. Your body is sacred. Your soul is real. You matter even in death. That belief powered this entire enterprise from the first brain hook to the last puff of incense. By the time the final chant is whispered and the priest places his hand gently over your heart, or the spot where your heart used to be, the room is thick with perfume, candle smoke, and silence. The embalming tools are washed and stored. The canopic jars are closed. The final linen knot is tied an intricate symbolic loop, known only to the highest priests. And now you wait, because mummification isn't just about what's been done to you. It's about what comes next. The door of the tomb creaks closed. The slab slides into place. Darkness descends. But unlike the living who fear the dark, you've been trained for this. You've rehearsed for this. Every chant, every oil, every piece of jewelry, they've all prepared you to walk through shadow. In the distance, maybe, just maybe, you hear the faint sound of harps, or maybe it's the wind through the tomb's air shaft. Either way, you're not scared. You are ready. You are no longer a mere human. You've been dried, scented, wrapped, and sung over. You've been fumigated like a divine spice rack. You've had your soul whispered to by a priest with far too much eyeliner. And now, as you lie within your linen cocoon, you await burial. But even now, your transformation isn't quite finished, because we haven't talked about the wrapping. Not just any wrapping, but a wrapping so meticulous, so excessive, so gloriously unnecessary that you may begin to wonder if the ancient Egyptians were secretly trying to invent the world's first mattress. Welcome to the linen phase. Historians still debate just how much linen was used per mummy, but estimates range from 200 to over 1,000 yards. That's enough to make several Roman togas, a few sailboats, or half an IKEA store's worth of curtains. You lucky, you are getting every inch of it, layer by layer, like a filo pastry made of death. The process begins with the fingers and toes. Each digit is wrapped individually like tiny spiritual spring rolls. Then the hands and feet. Then the arms and legs, one at a time. Then the head, which gets special attention. They make sure your nose is preserved. Your ears are gently swaddled. Your eyes are often padded to maintain their shape, giving your final face a faintly surprised expression. By now you resemble a very tightly bundled baby who has seen too much. But don't worry, you're not being wrapped in silence. Oh no. Each fold of linen comes with its own prayer, a chant, a recitation, a spiritual insurance policy. Some were formulaic, others personalized. Some addressed your soul, asking it to stay near. Others addressed the gods, asking them not to judge too harshly. Some were probably just the ancient version of, "Please don't come back and haunt us." And in between these folds, tiny surprises, amulets, jewels, scarabs, little carved figures tucked into the wrappings like talismans in a magical suitcase. One near the heart to protect your soul, one at the throat to preserve your voice, one at your feet to keep you walking toward the afterlife. Each one had a specific meaning and, more importantly, a specific position. If you mess up the placement, the spiritual GPS might send you to the wrong underworld. Some mummies were found with up to 50 separate amulets embedded in their wrappings. One particularly flashy priest had an amulet made of pure gold, shaped like a Djed pillar, a symbol of eternal stability, ancient bling for an eternal purpose. And then there's the Book of the Dead. No, it's not a book, at least not like the ones you find in libraries. It's a collection of spells and guidance for navigating the afterlife, often written on papyrus scrolls and tucked directly into the wrappings, or placed beside you in the tomb. Some were full length, stretching over 30 feet long. Others were mini versions with just a few spells, sort of like a cheat sheet if you couldn't afford the full edition. The wealthy had their scrolls decorated in color with gold leaf. The less fortunate might get a basic black ink version. Either way, it was your spiritual user manual. Now, as your entire body is being gently entombed in layer after layer of scented linen, the priests begin to shape you. Not just wrap you, shape you. Because the end goal isn't to make you look like a body. The goal is to make you look like Osiris, the god of the dead. So your arms are crossed in a regal pose. Your legs are bound together into a smooth column. Your head is lifted slightly on a block to give the impression of readiness. You are being turned from person into icon, from flesh into symbol. They bind the final wrappings with resin-soaked linen strips, which dry hard and keep your shape firm like the world's oldest body brace. And finally, once everything is in place, they add one last cloth, the shroud, a large sheet of linen wrapped around your entire body, covering even your face with sacred markings or painted symbols. It's the spiritual equivalent of an out-of-office sign. You are no longer available to the living, and you're not the only one. Nearby, in another chamber, other mummies are being prepared. Your family, perhaps, or your servants, or your pets. Because let's not forget, pets got mummified too. Cats, of course, were the VIPs of the animal kingdom. They were associated with the goddess Bastet and were treated with reverence. If you had a beloved cat, it might be wrapped in its own little sarcophagus, complete with painted whiskers and a bow tie-shaped linen wrap. Dogs were also honored. Monkeys, ibises, falcons, even crocodiles all received the mummification treatment. One crocodile mummy was found to contain 20 baby crocs, each mummified and laid neatly inside like a macabre nesting doll. You've got to respect that level of commitment to theme. Some animals were pets. Others were votive offerings, mummified not because they were beloved, but because someone hoped the gods would listen better if their request came with a side of embalmed cat. And now, with your final wrap in place, your amulets secured, your Book of the Dead gently tucked in beside your thigh, and a faint scent of cinnamon still lingering in the air, the embalmers prepare for the closing ritual. They perform the opening of the mouth ceremony. Yes, that's really what it's called. A priest, using a ceremonial tool shaped like a fishtail or an adze, pretends to open your mouth. This restores your ability to eat, speak, breathe, and complain about things in the afterlife. Because what's the point of living forever if you can't complain about how long it's been? The priest chants the final prayers. The embalmers bow their heads. The linen rustles one last time. And then, silence. You are done. You are no longer a person. You are a ritual object, a living god in linen, a symbol of eternity, an aromatic burrito of spiritual ambition. Congratulations. You are now fully mummified. So you've been wrapped tighter than a family secret, padded with prayers, slathered in resin, and turned into the spiritual equivalent of a vintage action figure still in the box. But we haven't talked about one of the most important parts of this process: amulets. Not just jewelry, not just accessories. No, these little items were cosmic tech, ancient Egypt's version of protective apps. Only you couldn't download them, you had to wear them. Or rather, have them sewn into your increasingly crunchy layers of linen. Tonight we enter the sparkly, mysterious world of magical amulets, your afterlife toolkit. You're lying perfectly still because, well, you're dead, and the embalmers start placing tiny charms across your body. But these aren't random souvenirs from the temple gift shop. Each one has a specific job, a position, and a sacred purpose. Let's start with the most famous, the scarab, usually placed over your heart or where your heart used to be. See Section 6. The scarab beetle represented rebirth, transformation, and protection. The most iconic version is the heart scarab, inscribed with Spell 30B from the Book of the Dead. What's that spell say? Roughly, dear heart, don't betray me when I stand before the gods. Because in the afterlife, your heart is weighed on a scale against the feather of truth. If it's heavy with guilt, you're devoured by a part crocodile, part hippo, part lion creature named Ammit. Very bad for your eternal prospects. So, the scarab is your emotional support beetle, your spiritual lawyer, your dead heart's defense attorney. Moving on, you get a Wadjet eye, also called the Eye of Horus. It's like ancient CCTV, worn for protection, healing, and good health, placed over cuts or vulnerable areas. If your mummy were a car, the Wadjet would be the airbag. Then comes the Djed pillar, a little totem that resembles a stack of pancakes or maybe a spinal column. It symbolizes stability and endurance. You usually get one near your back, basically a metaphysical posture corrector. Oh, and the Ankh, the famous cross with a loop symbol. It represents life, and it's often placed near your hands or chest. Life, of course, is ironic for someone who's already dead. But hey, that's the whole point, to restart life in the next world. Some mummies get the Djed, a symbol that looks like a ribbon. It's associated with the goddess Isis and offers protection especially for women. Consider it divine body armor woven into your spiritual pajamas. And now we get into the lesser-known amulets, the kind historians only discover when they find a mummy with 57 trinkets and go, "What is this one supposed to do?" There's the two fingers amulet, often placed near the incision site on your left flank where your organs were removed. It supposedly symbolizes the embalmer's two fingers to help that wound heal spiritually. Because apparently afterlife surgery needs afterlife recovery. There's the Isis knot, meant to bind your soul to her divine protection. The cobra amulet, to spit metaphorical venom at evil spirits, even tiny thrones, frogs, or feet, all symbolizing different wishes for your soul's journey. The placement of these charms isn't random either. There were maps for this, actual diagrams showing which charm goes where. The neck that gets the sacred collar amulet. The abdomen. Better slap a protective snake there. Feet. Definitely need something to stop you from walking the wrong spiritual path. Historians still argue whether these maps were standardized or personal, but we know that embalmers treated placement as a sacred art. And who made these amulets? Artisans, priests, sometimes even family members. They were crafted from faience, a kind of glazed ceramic, gold, carnelian, turquoise, obsidian, you name it. Some were mass-produced. Others were custom-made. Think of it like ordering a spiritual charm bracelet with expedited eternity shipping. In some cases, amulets were sewn directly into the linen. In others, they were placed underneath like secret armor. Some were tucked into the mouth or pressed against the tongue in case your soul needed to talk in the afterlife and didn't want to forget its lines. There are even recorded cases where a papyrus spell was rolled up and inserted inside an amulet. Yes, like a fortune cookie. Except, instead of "you will have luck," it says, "May you not be eaten by crocodile demons." Very motivational. And don't think only the rich got this treatment. Even lower-class mummies received simpler versions, clay amulets, reused beads, little carvings made with care. Some scholars argue that the presence of even one amulet meant someone loved you enough to protect your soul. Now here's the kicker. Many of these amulets were placed on the body before the final wrappings, but others were added between layers, which meant that wrapping and amulet placement happened simultaneously, a delicate dance of linen and magic. Imagine trying to wrap a burrito while tucking inspirational fridge magnets into the beans. That's the level of precision we're talking about. There's even evidence that some amulets were hidden not for the gods, but from tomb robbers. A clever priest might sew a gold charm deep in the chest layers, knowing that a casual thief wouldn't bother unwrapping that far. Ancient security systems. So now you, our perfectly wrapped mummy, are glowing metaphorically with layers of power. You are shielded from evil, strengthened for your journey, surrounded by divine symbols, and lightly rattling when you move, thanks to all the jewelry sewn into your chest. You might not look like much a linen log resting in a coffin, but you are, by ancient standards, fully loaded. You're a cosmic survivalist, an afterlife-ready relic, a linen-wrapped Swiss Army knife of magical function. So, when the time comes and your soul is tested by jackal-headed judges, fire-breathing gates, or serpents with 12 heads, you won't panic. You'll simply glow with confidence and whisper, "I brought my charms," and the gods will nod. Because you read the manual, you're nearly ready to leave the embalming chamber. Your insides have been emptied and blessed. Your outside has been transformed into a tightly packed burrito of linen prayers and amulets. But you're still missing something that would let you be seen in the afterlife, not just as a mummy, but as you. You need a face, not your old wrinkly, sun-damaged one. No offense. That one's had a tough ride. No, you need a new one, an eternal one. Enter the mummy mask. If you've ever seen one of those iconic gold faces from museums, the haunting eyes, the symmetrical features, the faintly smug expression of someone who knows they'll live forever. That's what we're talking about here. But not every mummy got the King Tut treatment. Let's unpack the options, shall we? The most luxurious and rarest version, a solid gold funerary mask. These were reserved for pharaohs and the ultra-elite, and not just because they looked cool. Gold didn't tarnish. It didn't rot. It was eternal, like the gods. Wearing a golden face was a way of telling the afterlife, "Hey, I'm not just visiting. I belong here." King Tutankhamun's mask, for example, weighs over 22 pounds. It features finely inlaid lapis lazuli, quartz, obsidian, and turquoise. His eyebrows are outlined in blue glass. His beard is braided and curves upward like a question mark for the divine. But don't feel bad if your mask wasn't made of solid gold. Most people received a more budget-conscious version, wood cartonnage, a kind of ancient papier-mâché made from linen and plaster, or sometimes terracotta. These masks were painted with vivid colors, with black-lined eyes and red or yellow skin tones depending on gender. They weren't trying to recreate your literal likeness. They were sculpting your ideal form, youthful, serene, alert. Your afterlife self, 10-10. No wrinkles, all angles. Historians still argue whether these masks were stylized templates or based loosely on the deceased's features. But they all shared one purpose: to make you recognizable in eternity. Imagine dying, reaching the gates of the afterlife, and the gods squinting at your dusty face. "Who's this? You don't look like your LinkedIn portrait." The mask avoids that embarrassment. Now, how was it made? If you were wealthy artists, came during the embalming process and took measurements of your face, sometimes even plaster casts. Not for ego's sake. This wasn't for your sarcophagus Tinder profile, but to ensure your soul could find your body later. The mask was then painted with symbols and phrases. a sun disk for rebirth, a winged scarab for protection. If you were a priest, you might get little hieroglyphs declaring your rank. If you were a noblewoman, you might get a painted necklace and subtle eyeliner. Everyone got something. And then, gently, it was laid over your face and tied down. Some were glued with resin. Some were just tucked under the linen like a final seal. And now you're beautiful. You've never looked better. You're not just wrapped and blessed. You are branded. The gods will recognize you. The judges of the dead will nod respectfully. Even Ammit, the devourer of guilty souls, might pause and go, "Wow, who did your mask?" But the mask isn't just cosmetic, it's functional. In Egyptian belief, the face was essential for identity. The Ka, your life force, needed to recognize your own body in order to return to it. If you had no face, no recognizable form, your K might drift forever, not ideal. So, your mask acted like a kind of soul magnet, a visual beacon in the afterlife fog. Like putting a name tag on your spiritual luggage. And now, while we're here, let's talk about one more thing, coffins, because you can't just lie around in a tomb like some barbarian. You need a box, a decorated, stylized, absurdly heavy box, or rather, several boxes. Most elite mummies were placed inside multiple coffins like nesting dolls. A small coffin inside a medium coffin inside a large sarcophagus. Each one painted, carved, and inscribed. Some were rectangular, others anthropoid, shaped like a human. The innermost coffin often featured your face, not a mask this time, but a carved likeness painted on wood or plaster. It matched the mask you wore beneath, reinforcing your identity again and again. Redundancy is key. When your soul's travel itinerary involves crossing rivers of fire and dodging snake demons, the coffins weren't just art. They were full of text, spells, instructions, maps, basically a GPS for the dead. Some were so detailed that modern archaeologists have used them to piece together entire chapters of the Book of the Dead. Imagine having your entire spiritual instruction manual engraved into your casket. That's commitment. Of course, not everyone could afford this. If you were lower class, you might get a simple coffin wooden with a crude painting, or a few prayers, or maybe just a woven mat, or a reused coffin. Yes, coffin recycling was a thing, especially during tough economic periods. Sometimes the old name wasn't even erased completely. You'd just lie there as someone else, hoping the gods didn't double-check the label. But for you, you've got the full setup, the linen, the amulets, the prayers, the face mask, the triple-layer coffin situation. You're ready to lie still for eternity. Or at least until the 19th century, when a group of British tourists show up with flashlights and the overwhelming desire to poke things. But that's a problem for future you. For now, you rest peacefully. Your golden or maybe gold-painted face stares up at the darkness of the tomb ceiling, silent, still, prepared. And if a mouse scurries across the floor, pausing to sniff your face, don't worry. The mask was built to last. So there you are, completely wrapped, amulet loaded, face masked and tucked inside a finely painted coffin. Or maybe 3. The tomb is sealed. The priests have mumbled their final spells and the embalmers have gone off to get some well-deserved bread and beer. It would seem like the end of the story. Except you're not going alone. Welcome to the strangest and most heartfelt part of mummification culture, the mummified animals. Yes, really. While you're peacefully waiting for eternity to begin, chances are there's someone curled up at your feet, someone slithering beside your coffin, or someone tucked into a tiny box, nestled beside your jewelry. Let's meet your eternal afterlife entourage. First up, the cat. Always the cat. If ancient Egyptians could be described with one emoji, it would probably be the cat face. Cats weren't just pets. They were divine. Specifically, they were sacred to Bastet, the lioness-turned-domestic goddess who protected home's women and the occasional temple full of squeaking rodents. Families mummified cats to honor Bastet, or as offerings in hopes of earning divine favor. Some cats were their personal companions. Others were more like ritual gifts bought embalmed and offered like incense. And yes, they were really mummified, carefully wrapped sometimes in elaborate zigzagging patterns, even with painted-on eyes. One X-ray revealed a perfectly posed kitten, curled like it was still mid-nap. So, if you're lucky or rich, there might be a cat at your feet in the tomb, keeping watch. But cats were only the beginning. Say hello to the ibis, long-legged, long-beaked birds, sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. If you worked in the scribal world or wanted brain power in the next life, an ibis might be your eternal companion. These birds were often buried in jars, neatly folded, wrapped in linen, and interred in vast underground aviaries like bird hotels for the deceased. Some ibis cemeteries had hundreds of thousands of birds. Historians still argue whether all those birds were bred for the purpose or captured wild, but either way, they're definitely the largest avian fan club in history. Next up, crocodiles. No, not as enemies. As offerings to Sobek, the crocodile god who protected the Nile and ruled over fertility, military strength, and big-toothed intimidation. Mummified crocs range from hatchlings to full-blown adult beasts, sometimes accompanied by mummified baby crocs sewn onto their backs like oddly macabre family portraits. It's not uncommon to find tombs where small crocodiles are stacked neatly like firewood, except, blessed and embalmed. A bizarre but deeply sacred practice. Then there are baboons, sacred to both Thoth and the sun god Ra. Their mummies often appear in tombs of those with priestly or solar associations. Imagine sharing your eternity with a preserved monkey wearing eyeliner. Honestly, not the worst afterlife scenario. And we can't forget the dogs. loyal companions, protectors, symbols of Anubis himself, the jackal-headed god of embalming. Dog mummies were sometimes household pets, sometimes ceremonial offerings. Some were even buried in small coffins, with their names carved into the side. You might lie beside your furry friend, both of you preserved, waiting for the field of reeds. But not all animal mummies were cute or symbolic. Some were mass-produced. That's right. In later periods, demand for sacred animal offerings surged. People wanted to leave gifts for the gods, especially during temple visits. So, embalmers and vendors created mummified animals by the millions. Problem is, there weren't always enough animals. So, sometimes these mummies were a little light on the actual animal part. Modern scans have shown bundles of sticks, feathers, mud, or just a single bird bone wrapped like a full creature. Basically, ancient holy scams. You paid for a falcon. You got some fluff and ambition. Historians still debate how much the temple staff knew and whether buyers cared. Now what about bulls? Special mention goes to the Oppius bull, a living deity in its own right. When one died, it wasn't just mummified, it was celebrated. Buried with honor in a massive tomb complex called the Serapeum, the Apis bull was like the pope of sacred cows. And yes, that's where the phrase holy cow probably comes from. Sort of. Back in your tomb, these animals, real or symbolic, are more than decorations. They serve three roles: companions. You don't go alone, not in death. Offerings. They're your spiritual bribes to the gods. Pay to play heaven, essentially. Protections. Some animals act as spiritual guards, fending off demons or misfortune in the afterlife. The result is a tomb that feels more like a miniature zoo than a lonely resting place. Some coffins even featured carvings of animals, painted or embossed on the sides. Cats lounging at your feet. Jackals curled beside your feet. Cobras slithering up the lid. Visual insurance policies against bad vibes in the next realm. And let's be honest, spending eternity in a dim, cool stone room. It's better with pets, especially when you know each one is blessed, wrapped, and honored in its own way. Today, many of these animal mummies sit quietly in museum drawers, their wrappings still intact, their stories half told. Some have tiny tags with forgotten names. Others, never unwrapped, sit peacefully in their jars. Companions to humans who no longer remember them. But in your afterlife, they remember you. Your cat curls beside your foot, eternally poised. Your ibis watches from its perch, head tilted in divine judgment. Your crocodile yawns, showing teeth to scare away soul thieves. And together you wait, not in fear, but in quiet, holy anticipation. Because the journey isn't over, and your spirit, it travels with friends. So far, your journey has been pretty luxurious. Gilded masks, sacred cats, perfumed oils. But let's pause and look around the embalming chamber a little more closely. Who's actually doing all this work? You're not embalming yourself after all. Enter the unsung professionals of death, the embalming team. Think of them as the ancient world's ultimate backstage crew part. Mortician, part magician, part chemical technician, and part customer service rep for the afterlife. First off, there wasn't just one embalmer. A proper mummification required a small army of specialists, each with a different job tool and spiritual function. And if you thought the gods had complicated job titles, wait until you meet these folks. Let's start with the top of the pyramid, the chief embalmer. This person often dressed as Anubis himself, the jackal-headed god of mummification. Wearing a mask or headpiece during the rituals, the chief wasn't just playing dress-up. He was channeling divine presence, overseeing the purity of the process. His job wasn't to remove guts or dry bodies. His role was spiritual supervision, making sure the proper prayers, rituals, and magical protections were performed at every stage. He was the equivalent of a funeral director crossed with a priest, if that priest also sometimes yelled at apprentices for wrapping the left arm before the right. Then there was the slicer of the body, a title that sounds much cooler than the job actually was. This unlucky guy had the duty of making the first incision, usually on the left flank of the body, to begin the organ removal. The problem, according to ancient belief, harming a corpse was impure. So, after making the incision, the slicer was often ritually chased away by the other embalmers, who would pretend to pelt him with stones while cursing loudly. Think of it like a really theatrical HR reprimand. We love your work, but please leave. You've spiritually contaminated the room. Next up, the eviscerators. They were responsible for carefully removing the stomach, intestines, liver, and lungs, each to be separately embalmed and placed in canopic jars. The heart, depending on the time period and the family's beliefs, might be left in or removed with great ceremony. As we mentioned, historians still debate the rules on that one. And yes, the brain removal had its own specialist too. The person in charge of extracting the brain through the nose using a long metal hook needed not only strong hands but a delicate touch. Swirling the tool around without smashing the skull required skill. It's not unlike trying to scoop pudding out of a balloon without popping it. Less elegant than it sounds, after organ removal, you had the washers and dryers. No, really. These embalmers would wash the empty body cavity with palm wine and spices, then pack it with natron, the magical drying salt of the Nile, to remove all moisture. Sometimes they even stuffed the body with bundles of natron-soaked linen to help it keep its shape, because no one wants to enter eternity looking deflated. Then came the resin specialists, those who applied layers of hot resin to seal the body after drying. Resin smelled intense, like pine tar incense and a touch of burnt barbecue, but it was antimicrobial and helped the body keep its shape for centuries. Bonus, it gave the skin that glossy, coffee-colored finish we now associate with mummies. Next, the oilers and perfumers. This team rubbed the corpse with sacred oils and perfumes, myrrh, cedar, frankincense, juniper, cinnamon. The goal, to please the gods and cover up any lingering natural aromas. If you'd ever wanted to be dipped in a vat of ancient Chanel number 5, this was your moment. After the oils, the wrappers took over. Now, this wasn't just about winding linen around the body like some ancient craft project. It involved hundreds of yards of cloth applied in specific patterns with specific prayers, amulets, and sometimes even inscribed bandages. Each finger, each toe, every limb had to be separately wrapped, then bundled again, then tucked, then blessed. It took days. And if you're thinking, surely they didn't do this for everyone, you're right. The full deluxe wrap was for the elite. Common folks might get a simpler version, maybe just a sheet, maybe no wrapping at all, just a coating of resin and a prayer whispered through clenched teeth. Now these embalmers didn't work for free. Mummification was a business and a booming one. The embalmers were organized into professional guilds or temple groups. Families would negotiate. Prices choose packages, gold, mask, or painted wood, full wrap or half wrap, and settle on extras like animal companions or extra prayers. Some even opted for budget mummification, where the body was quickly dried and buried without all the fancy flair. Think of it like selecting a wedding package. Only instead of flowers and seating charts, you're choosing canopic jars and resin levels. What's particularly fascinating is how revered but also feared embalmers were. They handled sacred rituals. They knew the secrets of preservation. They communicated with the gods of death. But they also touched corpses, which made them ritually impure in many people's eyes. It was a paradox respected experts, yet socially avoided. Like rock stars of death, no one wanted to sit next to at dinner. Some embalmers were buried near the necropolis where they worked, sometimes even within the burial complexes themselves. A few became legends. One inscription tells of an embalmer who preserved 1,000 bodies in his lifetime. Imagine putting that on your tombstone. And then there were the apprentices, poor souls. They did the worst jobs carrying Natron cleaning tools, folding linen, fetching resin in the heat of the day. If an arm fell off during wrapping, guess who had to discreetly reattach it with a smile? That's right, ancient interns. But these teams worked in harmony. Every incision, every amulet placement, every chant was choreographed like a sacred ballet. All with one goal, to make you last forever. They believed that if they did their job right, your soul would pass every test in the afterlife, reach paradise, and be reborn in radiant, eternal peace. And all of that rested on the shoulders of people most of us will never know the names of. Not kings, not gods, not priests, just embalmers, doing their work in the shadow of the sacred, wrapping the dead in linen and hope. By now you're perfectly preserved, swaddled like a sacred burrito, and surrounded by cats, ibises, and maybe a nervous-looking embalmer sprinting away from the tomb. But your journey to the afterlife isn't just about you. No. This isn't some lonely solo backpacking trip across the cosmos. You're taking things with you, lots of things. Let's explore what the ancient Egyptians believed you'd need. Once you cross the threshold into the field of reeds, a place so idealized it makes most modern resorts look like disappointing roadside motels. First, on your eternal packing list, jewelry. Lots of it. You're not just being buried with bling for fashion points. Each piece serves a magical purpose. Gold was considered the flesh of the gods, so having it close to your skin was a form of spiritual armor. Amulets, scarabs, ankhs, and bracelets were thought to protect the wearer, amplify divine favor, and offer bonus points in the afterlife entrance exam. If you're high status, you might get a heart scarab placed strategically over your chest. It whispered your virtues to the gods when your heart was weighed, kind of like your resume, speaking on your behalf while you nervously stand in the lobby. Next, food. Yes, the afterlife included meals. You didn't want to arrive only to discover that celestial room service had a 1,000-year wait time. So your tomb might contain loaves of bread, dried meats, jars of beer, or little cakes shaped like geese. Some of this food was real and wrapped up with the body, but often it was symbolic, painted or carved images on the walls, or tiny clay models meant to activate magically on the other side. Historians still argue whether people believed the dead consumed the food physically or spiritually. But either way, you weren't expected to go hungry. A thoughtful tomb was a fully stocked pantry. Now furniture, beds, stools, headrests, all of these were common burial inclusions. Why? Because nobody wants to nap on stone for eternity. Some tombs included foldable chairs and full-size canopy beds. Even the pharaoh Tutankhamun had 3 beds buried with him, which, let's be honest, seems excessive unless you're running a ghost Airbnb. Weapons and tools were another must, not necessarily for violence, but for self-reliance. You might need to farm hunt or defend yourself against demons in the underworld. So, bows, arrows, knives, and throwing sticks were standard gear, often made of wood, sometimes real, sometimes symbolic. The message was clear: in the next life you fend for yourself. Which brings us to Shabdi figurines, tiny servant statues. Picture this: you're in the afterlife, lounging in the sun, when Osiris sends you a memo. Time to dig canals. You, being both dead and deeply relaxed, would prefer not to. That's when your little army of Shabtis steps up. Each figurine was inscribed with a spell that told them to take on your chores in the afterlife. The more you had, the less manual labor you'd be expected to do. Wealthy tombs sometimes had hundreds, like ancient ghost interns. And yes, there were Shabti overseers too, figurines in fancier poses with whips or staffs meant to supervise the other Shabtis. Nothing says efficiency like outsourcing your afterlife responsibilities before you even get there. Now let's talk about boats. Yes, boats. The Nile was central to Egyptian life and their vision of the afterlife. So You might be buried with a full wooden model of a boat, complete with tiny oarsmen. These were not for show. They were your transportation across the celestial waters. The journey to paradise required more than a good attitude. You needed a vessel. Some tombs included multiple boats for different purposes. One for travel, one for rituals, maybe one for fishing. Basically, an eternal garage of mini yachts. And you're now the proud owner of a ghost navy. Let's not forget the cosmetics and personal care items. Even in death, grooming was important. Combs, mirrors made from polished bronze jars of scented oil, kohl eyeliner, and razors were often buried with the deceased. Not only did these reflect real-life wealth, but they were also a statement: I intend to look fabulous for all eternity. Ancient Egyptians believed the afterlife was a continuation of the good life, which meant looking sharp. A disheveled mummy was practically a social faux pas. Some tombs also included games like Senet, an ancient board game resembling a cross between chess and spiritual warfare. Senet was played during life, but also had symbolic value in death. It represented the soul's journey through the afterlife. Historians still puzzle over the exact rules. They were never written down, but the concept remains clear. Winning meant a safe passage to the land of the blessed. Now, a surprising one: writing tools. If you were a scribe or wealthy enough to admire scribes, you might get buried with a palette, ink pots, and reed pens. These weren't decorative. Literacy was rare and powerful. The ability to record prayers, copy spells, and perhaps even compose poetry in the afterlife was a form of eternal influence. But not everything was functional. Some tomb goods were purely sentimental. Letters from family, dolls from childhood, miniature statues of favorite pets, a worn-out pendant. These were the emotional anchors of memory, proof that even when a body turns to linen and resin, the heart still remembers. It's easy to imagine your tomb looking like a sacred version of your childhood bedroom, overflowing with things that made you feel safe, proud, loved. And lastly, walls. Tomb walls weren't blank. They were decorated in vivid paintings and carvings depicting your life, your dreams, your afterlife, adventures, scenes of harvesting, hunting, feasting, embracing loved ones. These weren't just art, they were instructions for your soul, a storyboard for resurrection. Hieroglyphs weren't just pretty, they were magic. Every symbol carved on a tomb wall was a spell, a map, a declaration. Even silence was filled with sacred meaning. So there you lie, perfectly preserved, surrounded by symbols of wealth, love, duty, and divine favor. Your body is still, but your legacy is buzzing. Because long after your heart stops beating, your name, your stories, your possessions, they keep whispering through time. And that more than gold or linen or natron is what the ancient Egyptians believed made you immortal. So, you're all packed. Linen check. Spells check. Snacks for the journey. Absolutely. Now what? Now you go to your eternal resting place. But this isn't just a hole in the ground with a polite headstone. No, friend. You're heading into a tomb, and not just any tomb. A full-fledged eternal Airbnb, designed with all the amenities you didn't know you'd need after death. You see, ancient Egyptians believed your soul, your ka, to be specific, would return to visit your body. That meant your tomb had to be both sacred temple and luxury crash pad. Let's start with the layout. A standard tomb for the well-off had multiple chambers. First, a chapel, or offering area where the living could bring gifts and speak prayers to the dead. Then came the inner rooms, storerooms for all those afterlife goods you just heard about. And finally, the burial chamber, where your sarcophagus waited, wrapped in spells and sealed in stone. In some elite tombs, like those in the Valley of the Kings, the burial chamber was carved deep into the earth with multiple corridors and hidden rooms, because the afterlife apparently had a thing for dramatic entrances. Tomb walls weren't boring beige. No, they were vividly painted, filled with scenes of everyday life, divine encounters, and heavenly landscapes. You might see yourself farming grain under a golden sun, or embracing the god Osiris, or sailing across celestial rivers. These weren't just memory lane. They were visual spells designed to manifest these blessings in your next life. Now let's talk about the false door. Yes, that's a real thing. A slab of carved stone made to look like a door often placed in the tomb chapel. It wasn't meant to be opened by the living. Instead, it served as a spiritual portal, a place where your ka could come and go between worlds. Offerings were left here, and names spoken aloud. If someone forgot your name, well, it said your soul could fade. So yes, names were power. A tomb was as much a billboard as a burial. Next up, traps and tricks. You might think surely mummification is enough to keep grave robbers at bay, but ancient Egyptians were paranoid, and maybe rightfully so. Some tombs featured hidden chambers, false corridors, and even booby traps. There are tales, probably exaggerated, of collapsing passageways and cursed seals. More likely, the real deterrents were practical sealed doors, steep shafts, misleading layouts. Some tombs even included curses etched into the stone, usually something like, "Whoever disturbs this tomb will lose their life, their children, and their camels." You know, just in case the threat of divine wrath didn't cut it. Of course, none of this really stopped tomb robbers. Even during the New Kingdom period, tomb theft was such a widespread issue that priests began secretly relocating royal mummies to safer caches. Entire bodies were bundled up and reburied in anonymous tombs in hidden valleys. Ironically, this is how we found so many mummies together centuries later. But back to your tomb. You're sealed in. The priests chant one last spell. The door closes, light disappears, dust settles. And that's when the magic begins. According to Egyptian belief, you're not just lying there waiting. Your soul is busy, very busy. You face a journey through the underworld, battling serpents, gates, and challenges. You need to pass judgment in the hall of Mahat, where your heart is weighed against the feather of truth, too heavy with sin. You get eaten by Ammit, a terrifying beast that's part lion, hippo, and crocodile. Not a great Yelp review, but if your heart is pure, you go on to the field of reeds, an idealized version of Egypt itself. Sunlight, food, music, boats, family reunions. You're surrounded by all the things you loved in life, but without the annoying sand in your sandals. And here's where your tomb becomes more than just stone walls. It's an anchor, a sacred GPS point for your soul. It's where the living come to honor you, where your ka can rest, where offerings sustain your journey. It holds your image, your name, your belongings, all of which help you continue existing. Now, of course, not every tomb was equal. The rich got palaces, the poor got pits. Sometimes literal holes in the desert with a few pots and a hastily wrapped body. But even these humble burials had meaning. The poorest Egyptians still wanted to be near family tombs, to be remembered, to be wrapped in the rituals, even if only partially. Historians still argue whether the elaborate tomb decorations were meant for the gods or for the dead themselves. Was it theater architecture magic? All of the above. What's certain is this: the Egyptians built with eternity in mind. Even their construction materials, limestone, granite, plaster, were chosen for durability. Paints were made from crushed minerals. Carvings etched deep to outlast erosion. The goal was permanence, and in many cases it worked. You're lying there now, well, figuratively, with images of geese and boats above your head. The scent of myrrh, faint but persistent, and maybe a slightly creepy priest's inscription nearby, whispering protection spells. Occasionally, a breeze slips through a crack in the stone, stirring the dust. Somewhere far above the living, still walk over the surface of the Nile Valley, mostly unaware of you. But your tomb remains, a silent testimony, a message in stone: I was here, I mattered, I am remembered. And in the end, maybe that's what we all want. Not just to avoid oblivion, but to build a small sacred space where our names can live on even when we're gone. At this point, you might be thinking, wow, being mummified sounds like a deluxe spa day, followed by a personalized retirement condo. And for some, it really was. But let's take a breath and step outside the gilded sarcophagus for a moment, because not everyone got to be embalmed with frankincense and wrapped in linen poetry. Nope. This is the part of the story where we talk about the not-so-rich, the average Joe and Jane of ancient Egypt. See, mummification wasn't just a cultural rite, it was also a business. And like any business, it came with tears. Think of it like today's airline seating. You've got first-class pharaohs and nobles economy, plus wealthy officials, and then standing room only, aka the everyday folks. So, how did common people handle death? Did they just Rot? Not quite. Many Egyptians still believed in the same afterlife myths, the same journey, the same sacred weight of the heart. But when it came to preparing the body, they had to make sacrifices figuratively, not ritually. Let's start with budget embalming. If you couldn't afford the full 70-day process, there were streamlined versions. Maybe you got fewer Natron baths, or they skipped the brain removal entirely. Honestly, it's a weird flex to begin with. Your body might have been simply sun-dried, coated in resin, and wrapped hastily. Sometimes the organs weren't removed at all, just left to decompose inside, which did not make for the most fragrant mummies. In other cases, the body was tightly bound in layers of cloth with cheap resin poured on top, essentially gluing you into a semi-preserved block. This process still honored the spirit of mummification, but with practical shortcuts. Like ordering a wedding cake and just getting cupcakes, sweet, symbolic, and still gets the job done. Then there were those who couldn't afford even that. For the truly poor, burial might involve placing the body in a shallow pit in the desert. Surprisingly, this natural burial could preserve a body well. The hot, dry sand acted like natron light, drawing out moisture and creating accidental mummies. Some of the earliest Egyptian burials, predating mummification as an industry, looked like this: simple, raw, unwrapped, and perfectly preserved by nature. In a strange twist of fate, many of these early or low-cost burials lasted longer than the fancy resin-soaked gold-stuffed tombs, which were more likely to be looted or collapse over time. So, yes, sometimes less was more. Let's look at the communal side of death. If you were part of a village or city community, death became a group event. Families pooled resources, held small processions, and recited prayers together. Offerings were simpler, maybe a jug of beer, some bread, or a painted image on a scrap of papyrus. But they carried the same weight of love and remembrance. And while the rich had elaborate tombs, common people might have been buried in cemeteries or shared tomb shafts stacked neatly with relatives wrapped in reused linens. Yes, like actual tablecloths and marked with stones or clay tablets. Even children and infants were mummified, in some cases sometimes lovingly wrapped and placed in ceramic jars. It shows a depth of care that transcends wealth. No gold required, just a deep hope that the soul would make it safely to the afterlife. Now let's talk about what happened when someone wanted to be mummified but couldn't afford a professional. DIY mummification, if you will. There are traces of people attempting home burials, wrapping bodies themselves, drying them over days, even using salt and oils. Think of it like trying to recreate a Michelin-starred dish in your kitchen with what you found at the corner market. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or rare, but the fragments we've found, hastily wrapped bones, partial resins, burial masks made from scraps, suggest a deep yearning for ritual even when the tools weren't available. In the end, the desire to be mummified, to be remembered, to be preserved, that was universal, whether you were royalty or a reed cutter. Of course, economic inequality in death isn't a new story, but ancient Egypt had an interesting twist. Even pharaohs weren't safe from decay. Tomb robbers often stripped gold, dismembered bodies, or burned remains for ease of transport. Some royal mummies were recovered in appalling states, missing limbs, swapped coffins, or completely unlabeled, which means that sometimes the nameless peasant in a desert pit outlasted the king buried in a $10 million granite tomb. There's a strange poetry in that. It's also a reminder that for all the rituals and resins, permanence is an illusion. The sands shift, the tomb walls crumble, names fade, and yet here we are, thousands of years later, still talking about them. Even the poorest mummified body carried a name, a prayer, a dream. And now that dream floats in your sleepy imagination, cradled in linen, warmed by desert sun, humming with forgotten songs. Because whether you were embalmed with oil and gold or buried with nothing but love and a jar of beer, you were part of a civilization that refused to let go of the dead, and in doing so, they kept living. Now that your body's wrapped, painted, scented, and sealed, whether with royal pomp or modest care, it's time to think about the real reason all of this was done, your journey to the afterlife. Because in ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a bureaucratic cosmic adventure filled with magical gates, monster-infested rivers, and paperwork. Okay, not literal paperwork, but plenty of scrolls, spells, and tests. So, let's say you, the newly departed, are just starting out. Your soul has separated from your body. Your ka, your ba, and your ach are getting their metaphysical bearings. You're probably confused, disoriented, maybe a bit annoyed that no one packed more snacks. But there's no time to dawdle. You're being summoned to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. It's a vast, shadowy mirror of the real world, filled with sand stars, rivers, and creatures that make spiders look like puppies. Your first challenge: navigation. Luckily, you've been buried with a book of the dead, which isn't as ominous as it sounds. It's more like a travel guide. Think Lonely Planet, but with instructions on how to not get eaten by a snake with 5 heads. The book is filled with spells, passwords, and illustrations that show you how to cross lakes of fire or convince demons that you're totally allowed to be here. Historians still argue whether these books were ever actually read by the deceased or simply symbolic, like a passport you wave at customs. Some tombs include full scrolls. Others, only a handful of essential spells painted on walls or sarcophagi, like bringing only the Cliff Notes version to a final exam. You move forward cautiously. Every hour of the night is ruled by a different gate, guarded by strange beings, some human, some animal, many combinations of both. Each demands a specific phrase or gesture. One might ask you the name of the demon that devours liars. Another might test your memory with a riddle, One might simply want you to tell it a flattering joke. This isn't metaphorical. These were actual beliefs. Egyptians thought the soul needed to earn its way through the duat, not by power or wealth, but by knowledge, which is a lovely little democratic twist, honestly. Eventually, after a long, spooky series of encounters, you reach the most important room in all of Egyptian theology, the Hall of Mahat. This is where your heart, yes, your actual embalmed or magically restored heart, is weighed on a giant golden scale against the feather of truth. On the left, your heart, the sum of your deeds. On the right, the feather, the symbol of justice and cosmic order. If your heart is too heavy, burdened by sin, lies, or unpaid library fines, it sinks. And waiting nearby is Amit the Devourer, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo. Basically 3 of the deadliest animals on earth rolled into one fangy soul vacuum. If she eats your heart, that's it. You're done. No afterlife, no reincarnation, no Netflix, just poof. But if your heart balances, you pass. And here's the beautiful part. The gods aren't the only ones watching. You have to declare your negative confessions, a list of things you didn't do. I did not steal. I did not lie. I did not make someone cry on purpose. There are 42 of these declarations, not because they love lists, but because there are 42 divine judges watching. It's like the world's most intimidating audition. If you pass, and most people in the texts do pass, you get to enter the field of reeds. Now imagine the best version of your hometown. But the crops grow themselves. The sun is always warm, never hot. Your family is there. Your pets are there. There's music and food and lakes and games and no traffic. This is the Egyptian heaven. You spend eternity farming just enough to stay active sailing boats made of light, dancing with the stars, and visiting your tomb like it's your vacation house. Your Ba, your soul bird, flutters between worlds. Your Ka lounges in your tomb, eating spiritual bread. And here's a fun detail. You can still send messages to the living. Tombs have inscriptions requesting family members to offer prayers and food. Some were written like little complaint forms. If you don't keep feeding me, I will haunt your goats. Yes, actual quote, more or less. The afterlife was deeply connected to the land of the living. The dead weren't gone. They were involved. They watched over crops, inspired dreams, punished cheaters, and occasionally showed up in the family kitchen just to say hello. This sense of eternal presence explains why so much effort went into burials and rituals. To the ancient Egyptians, memory was power. Being remembered kept you alive. Even today, archaeologists sometimes find tomb graffiti messages from visitors saying, "I read your name. I remember you." It's a magical CPR across centuries. It keeps the Ka flickering. So, here you are, mummified, entombed, judged, forgiven, and now reclining in a cosmic field, watching the stars and sipping celestial beer brewed by gods who look like cats. All of it, from the drying salts to the resin-wrapped fingers to the shimmering funeral mask, was designed for this moment. You made it. And yes, your name is still known. So, what happens when your name isn't remembered? It's a quiet fear that ripples under the golden sheen of ancient Egyptian death rituals. Because for all the attention paid to embalming tombs and offerings, everything hinged on memory. Not just the physical kind. No one expected your body to last forever, but the spoken, written, and sung memory of your name. Your name. Your wren was believed to carry your identity, your very existence, across time. Without it, your soul couldn't receive offerings, couldn't navigate the duat, and might even cease to exist altogether. Yes, in a land where crocodiles patrolled the Nile, and plagues were just another Tuesday, the scariest thing of all was being forgotten, which is why names were everywhere, carved into walls, written on sarcophagi, painted on canopic jars, and whispered during prayers. Even the poorest families tried to write the name of the deceased on scraps of pottery or ink it on linen wrappings. Some tombs included Shabti figurines, tiny servant dolls, meant to work for you in the afterlife. Each one bore your name and a spell, commanding it to serve you. Imagine a spiritual intern with your name badge who goes and farms your field of reeds while you sip date wine. Luxury. But here's the catch. If your name was scratched out, whether by accident erosion or political revenge, you were in trouble. And this happened more often than you'd think. Enter damnatio memoria, Egyptian style. Pharaohs weren't immune. Take Hatshepsut, one of the most powerful female rulers. After her death, her stepson tried to erase her name from monuments, chiseling out hieroglyphs, smashing statues, pretending she never existed. Her mummy, for a long time, went unidentified. It wasn't until modern scholars remembered her that her memory came back to life. There's also Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who worshipped a single sun god. After his death, Egypt did a massive collective Tsitar el Plaze, smashing his temples, banning his name, and blaming him for every bad harvest. His radical ideas were nearly wiped from history until archaeologists pieced it back together. Historians still argue whether this erasure was purely political or theological. Was it vengeance? A reset? A form of magical punishment? The truth is, it was probably a bit of everything. But it wasn't always malicious. Sometimes names were simply lost, eroded by sandstorms, buried by floods, or stolen by looters. In these cases, the dead drifted into a quiet limbo. They might linger as Aku blessed spirits, or fade entirely. It's a bittersweet concept that eternity wasn't about living forever, but being remembered long enough for your ka to rest easy. And what about reused coffins? Yes, those existed, especially in later dynasties when money was tight and wood was rare. Old sarcophagi were scraped and recycled. Hieroglyphs were carved over portraits repainted. Your sacred name might be scratched off to make room for someone else's. A cosmic game of musical chairs, except the music stopped 2,000 years ago and someone stole your seat. Still, there's a curious mercy in all this. Sometimes archaeologists find unnamed mummies and try to identify them, giving them new names in the process. Nicknames like the Screaming Mummy or the Lady of the West Tomb. Is it accurate? Not really. Is it respectful? Questionable. But in a strange way, it reawakens the soul. Someone is looking at them again, talking about them. They matter. There's also the ancient Egyptian belief that anyone who speaks the name of the dead renews their existence. So when you whisper Tutankhamun or Cleopatra, or even that guy whose coffin was made into a bookshelf in Victorian London, yes, that happened. You're performing a small magic act. You're giving someone another moment in the sun. Your name is a thread, a light, a tether to eternity. And now that you're lying in your tomb with your canopic jars and your little painted offerings, you start to understand all of this. The salt, the wrappings, the spells. It wasn't just for physical preservation. It was a way to ensure that someone somewhere would see you. So maybe your tomb is deep in the desert, sand-blasted and quiet. Maybe centuries pass and the doors collapse. Maybe the scrolls decay. But one day, a curious explorer shines a flashlight on your painted name and says it out loud. And in that moment, you stir. Just a little. A flicker of awareness. Because someone remembered. And that was the point all along. And now, you rest. After all the slicing, salting, drying, wrapping, painting, praying, spelling, judging, and whispering, you have finally reached that most sacred and underrated of goal's stillness. But not the kind of stillness that's cold or empty. No, this is the stillness of completeness, of a cycle that began with your first breath and ended with your heart light as a feather. Let's zoom out for a moment. Above your tomb, the world continues. The Nile rises and falls. Farmers plant barley. Priests chant in temples. Children run through alleys, their laughter echoing past statues of gods with falcon heads and jackal jaws. And far below you lie in a stone cocoon, your arms crossed over your chest, your painted face staring calmly into the dark. Around you are jars, charms, faded flowers, bits of papyrus. Your linen wraps are stiff, the resin hardened like armor. Your chest is empty of organs, but your tomb is full of stories. You might think the story ends here, but in Egypt, nothing really ends, not even death. Because just above your mummified remains, there's a narrow crack in the tomb wall, just enough for light to slip through once a year. On the anniversary of your death, maybe. Or maybe on the solstice. The sun creeps in golden and sleepy and brushes your cheek. In that golden glow the gods whisper, you've passed every test. You've dodged serpents, recited spells, balanced your heart. You've endured the elements, time, and even tomb robbers who, let's be honest, were very bad house guests. You've earned your rest. But here's the twist, you're not alone. Because every night millions of souls walk the duat. Some move silently. Others chant. A few probably grumble. I forgot the spell again, seriously. But you walk with them. Through shadowy lakes and starlit deserts, past doorways that only open if you speak your mother's name. And when you reach the field of reeds again and again, it's always spring. You're greeted by family, by pets, long gone, by music that sounds like your childhood. Your house is there just the way you remember it. You don't need to build anything. No pyramids, no legacy. Just being is enough. And back in the world of the living, someone stumbles across your name. Maybe a grandchild, maybe a scholar, maybe someone in a far-off land, reading dusty inscriptions by the light of a headlamp. They pronounce your name out loud. You flicker again, because in ancient Egypt to be remembered is to live. And so thousands of years later, someone's listening to this story. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're drifting off to sleep, eyelids heavy thinking about salt and sand and gods with ibis heads. But in doing so, you've become part of the ritual. You've remembered. You've carried the thread forward. You've given one more spark to a mummy, wrapped in prayers, sleeping in darkness, waiting for a name. And now, as the field of reeds stretches endlessly before you, wind rustling through golden stalks, a warm breeze brushing your skin, you exhale, you smile, you rest. And now, all the linen has been wrapped, all the jars have been sealed. The sun has set low over the desert, casting long shadows over the tombs and temples of a land that once believed in forever. You lie still, nestled in the silence of time. There's no rush here. The winds hum softly outside your resting place, tracing the ancient stones, and the stars above shimmer like tiny stories waiting to be told. Every step you took through the duat, the strange landscapes, the doors that whispered the gods with their impossible faces, was a quiet rehearsal for this moment, for peace, for stillness. Let the images float behind your eyes, now the scent of incense, the flicker of torchlight on painted walls, the delicate brush of linen across your skin. You've passed the tests. Your heart was light. You made it through. Outside, life continues. Birds rising over the Nile, water lapping against reeds, the sound of sandals on temple stone. But here where you rest, everything slows. The air is cool. The stone walls hold you gently. You are not forgotten. Not now. Not ever. So let your breath soften. Let the weight fall away from your limbs. You are in the field of reeds now, where it is always morning, where the light is always soft, where the name is always remembered. Sleep well, traveler.